I was in the militia in 1936 in the signal platoon, and I even got sergeant's qualifications during the militia time. I joined up again when the war started, and I took the Milton platoon to camp in 1940. And in 41 we were mobilized in April. In July we were gone, right overseas. That was the draft of 4 companies that went over at that time. Prior to that, the Lawrence Scots had a small representation with what they called a NETD, which is a non-effective transient depot. Otherwise, we would have been over there a lot sooner because we had a full regiment in 40. As an officer, you had to work on the training. We moved into Hamilton in April, and that year it was hot. And we had Cinder Square behind the big underground wire and cable place, a very smelly place in the smell of old rubber. And we were there, and it was just belting hot. Cinders reflect the heat, and we were given the regular shots that you'd get over probably a period of a month or more. We got them all within a week, I think. Most of the fellows were groggy most of the time from being filled with so many things, tetanus shots and anything else that they gave us before we went over. We didn't really have much time there. It was concentrated, I can tell you. In fact, I think I was so groggy one time, the colonel came by and said, "You're doing fine." I said, by that time I'd repeated the same thing to them 3 times. I didn't realize what I was saying. I mean, we were actually infantry, and we marched into Niagara in the Lake with a full battalion in one of the hottest days of the year. And we wore trews. Now, we didn't wear kilts. And those trews were very thick wool. And the men came into the park, and they just looked like dominoes going down. There was so much heat, and they just practically suffocated. They were in bad shape. They weren't well trained by then. I mean, they hadn't been in the army long enough to harden up. But for the next year, I worked with Milton and went up to Milton every 2 weeks. I had trained up there in Georgetown, and I finished my commission by that time. So from there on, it was a very short time to the day that I got married, and within a week, I think I was on my way overseas. We had one night in Niagara Falls. We were fortunate to come back, and we lived in a room in Hamilton before we took off. Very short time.
Hard on your wife?
I think we spent 3 days on board the ship going over in Halifax. If you ever lived in a sewer, that Halifax harbor was a sewer. Everything from all the boats was dumped out there. And then we landed in Glasgow after a trip across the Atlantic. We touched right up to Greenland and Iceland. I tell you how cold it was. Men were issued great coats, 2 sets of winter underwear. This was July. And they wore both sets of underwear and the great coats. It was so cold up there. I commanded two Royal Guards. One was with the Faisal brothers, and the other one was the Duke of Gloucester. I was 2 corps headquarters then. So I had 100-man guard. And it was rather an unusual experience to walk up to the front of 2 Arabs, and these boys were big, and ask them if they could inspect the car. You don't know whether he's just speaking Arabic or what. I finally got them out there, though. We went up and down, they inspected. Aside from that, we were told that this was very hush-hush. We were not to speak about it, not to write about it. So about 6 weeks later, I'm in London, and I'm looking at the newsreel on the screen. There I am coming out to the Faisal brothers. That's how hush-hush was. I think a lot of the things that were hush-hush probably didn't need to be, but I guess they had to try to get all the fellows just to sort of not open their mouth about anything. You know, I went from, we had to spend a long time at the holding unit because people were to replace. They didn't move out for months after we got there. They'd already had put people in the spot where we were destined for. We were supposed to be the defense of all the headquarters, just Army, Corps, Division, right down to brigade. And we just sat there doing. Well, I think we had the biggest workforce of any unit. They did nothing but work in that camp. And well, you had to do something. You had to keep the fellows busy. They did training. They marched. They did everything else. They did route marches, everything you can think of. But they also got the job of cleaning the camp too. They had that camp was the cleanest camp. It was a general holding unit. When we went over, they didn't know what to do with us. We were infantry, but we didn't have a unit headquarters. So they sent us in. We had the medical people over there, the dental, the provo. They all did training all the time, and of course the medical corps were that was all officers. The dental were all officers. They never wrote on anything at all. They didn't pray or do anything. So our boys got the sort of a dirty job to do, but it kept them busy, kept their mind going. I went from Corps headquarters. I'd taken on a job to train a Fortune Water Company for the 4th Division because they had a support group there, and the support battalion had machine guns, ACAC, and the mortars. Well, they didn't have any guns for them for the machine guns. They cut out the ACAC altogether because the light ACAC, they said they'd never use it, it was too late. So I trained the Fortune Water Company for 6 weeks. I'd never seen one before. So one company, a PEILH, that's Prince Edward Island Light Horse, and they were armored. And they were a good bunch of boys. They worked hard. I had a good 6 weeks, good rapport with them. They called it off, sent me back to the Corps headquarters. And I think it was within 6 weeks the general came down and he said, I have some very bad news for you. You're going back to the holding unit, your company. And he said, you're being replaced by the Prince Edward Island Light Horse, the company I trained. He said, it's a political move. He said, they only have a small group. He said, they need a representation. So we just got pushed back into the holding unit. And from there I went to 2 Div headquarters and ended up there just before I went to hospital. I ended up as just going to take on as camp commandant, and that was they just were pushing into Germany. That was the day I left in the night. The night they brought, I forgot how many hundreds of planes and how many hundreds of guns, and they just all fired. The guns fired, and then the planes went over, and they just bombed everything on the other side. I was going back to hospital. In fact, the fellow sent me back was a doctor from Oakville, and he sent the Dutch LO, a liaison officer. We both went back, chest. I'd been up for 21 hours a day because before that push, everything was concentrated, and I was concentrating all the outside troops in the same area as we had for Div headquarters. I think I had people stuffed in everything but barrels. The attics were all filled, I can tell you. Jack Worrell was the doctor. Jack was here for a long time. He's long since dead now. Jack Worrell was our medical officer at 2 Div headquarters. We were in the same mess together. I still have one man here in Oakville who was my transport corporal. All the others are. No, I have one other one. He was a Milton boy. He's still around Oakville somewhere. I have one living up north somewhere. I see him anytime there was a funeral, he'd be down to Milton. He'd call me. But well, I tell you, when we landed in France. We were at second div, which was the second wave to go in. Third div went in the first. We were fortunate we got off in this much water, and that was very nice not to get off and drop down and find it up to your neck. A lot of the boys didn't come up when they got off of landing craft. But we went through there. We went through from through Caen. In fact, my boys normally, with the camp commandant at that time, I'd have a section or so go up with the camp commandant. They lay out a div headquarters, and the next move it was all signed. It was all signed. They moved all the div headquarters trucks in. Bulldozers would come in. They drive a truck down, in a hole about this deep, and all the earth on the outside to make sandbags. That's how they protected the div headquarters trucks, where all the high-priced help were, the brigadiers and everything else. My boys went up one time and they tried to they were going to set up the div headquarters, and the mortars are coming down so fast that they had to get back. I said he actually retreated. I said, the tactical withdrawal really occurred. No, I think our first night there landed was rather interesting, because in the next field they had the British heavy ack, which are big guns. And when they went up, it sounded like somebody with a huge whip just cracking it. And we used the German slit trenches, and they built them wide at the bottom and narrow at the top, which to me is not the way you build a structure. If anything falls in, you can't get out of it. And as soon as they started that shelling, the vibration was terrible. So I never went back in a slit trench again. So only we were bombed there with the Germans bombed us, and I lost my first 2 men and about, I think, 10 wounded. I lost my driver that night. Poor guy, he didn't get out to get in a slit trench. All you could see, one little mark on his forehead, one little tiny piece of shrapnel. But, one of the fellows went out in the canoe in the Orne River, and turned over, and he never came up. This is one of the fellows from the headquarters. So my boys dragged for him. He used Dannert wire, took strings of Dannert wire from both sides. He just dragged it along. I eventually, right beside where my headquarters truck was, I had a complete cemetery of about 12 of them. I had new neighbors. They never had a chance. The whole bank up above there was just filled with machine guns and that stuff. They just walked into a mess of shrapnel. But I had the fellows from Oakville with me. There was the fellow that ran the liquor store here, Tommy Evershed, one of the boys had worked at the beer store. Oh gosh, what are the rest of them? I had about 6 or 8 at times. Oh, but my transport corporal, of course, he's the one that's left. I can't think of all the names right. Oh, I know one of the boys was a postman. The poor guy ended up with diabetes and lost both his feet from that. To look up and you see the big British bombers coming over, and they're opening their bomb bays before they before they get to you, and you wonder, are they going to drop them before they get here, after they get here, or on us? And we had one trip there where there was a mix-up in what happened, and they dropped bombs short. When they went through the Falaise Gap, I had a group of my men up at div headquarters, what they called an advanced headquarters. That meant you were sitting right practically on the backs of the fellows who were going through. And that night they bombed behind us. And funny thing, my wife's uncle, who was in the First World War, was driving a truck. an ammunition truck. He'd unloaded a load of ammunition at an ammunition dump. He drove away from it, looked back, and the thing went right up in the air. They bombed our own place. That happened, you know. I mean, after all, sometimes messages didn't get through, or somebody did the wrong thing. But that was a night to remember, because that was just up ahead was Falaise, and that was, they called the gap before we went right on through into Belgium. Going out on Walcheren Island, third div went to the south of the Scheldt Peninsula, and they went across on water buffaloes, they called them. These were really tanks that you could ride across in the water. And we went, second div went around up from Antwerp and went in right into the Scheldt, right out to Walcheren Island, and that's where they bottled it up there. Quite a sight to drive along a road. You got nothing but this much water out on either side, filled with tulip bulbs. These thousands of tulip bulbs that were just floating about out there, because they just stored them, and once they flooded the area, you had no place else but to float around. And the capital was called Goes, G-O-E-S, and when we stopped out there, we spent the one night there, and the next day, night up. And that, you know, you'd always heard on the little radios we had that any of the girls that cropped their hair, you know, if they were down there at the town square, they were cropping hair of the girls. They said, if you slept with the Germans, you got your hair cut off. But I said, within 6 weeks, the hair grew in, they were sleeping with the Canadians. No, it was an unusual sight to see it happen. You sort of pitied them, but after all, that's wartime. Human nature is still a little bit stronger than the war, I think. But I went back over in #85 with the Toronto Scottish. I remember the Toronto Scottish Association too. And this chap who's 98, he was Toronto Scot, and we went over together. And I came across the big square at Amsterdam, and a lady rushed up to me. She said, I'd like to thank you. I said, I'd like to thank any Canadian. She said, my father was released, freed just outside of Amsterdam, and he came back and was able to find my mother. And she says, I was born 9 months later. She said, I have a lot to thank. She said, if they hadn't released, he hadn't been freed that night, she says, I wouldn't be talking to you. They were, you have to see their faces really to appreciate what the Dutch went through. On the trip there, when we went through on the big parade, we were in trucks. They were in pouring rain. For 2 hours they stood there, threw flowers in. We had trucks full. Every truck went by. We had flowers right up the full length of the truck. They just hand them, not bunches or single ones, rows, anything at all. But you watch the faces, and you look for people your own age. And these are the women that went through that. And you can see that, well, I think it's, in a way, it's sort of a drawn expression in pain that they could never, I guess they could never erase. And it's kind of sort of nice, as you went by, you waved at them, you saw them kisses, they were even, they thought that was pretty nice. And they returned them. That was quite a parade. We went through all the cemeteries and everything. In fact, I was fortunate. We got to, if you were selected to go over for your regiment, you were given a wreath to lay at the one grave site. And you have to be there to see those rows of crosses. That's what you. So I said, grown men don't cry, but they got a lot of damp eyes. I watched the fellas. No, a lot of them had a lot of memories. Of course, a lot of them had a lot of fun. in between times, there was nothing to do. If you got leave, you were pretty lucky. When I went to Div headquarters, I took over from an officer. I don't know why he left, I was sent out there, and as I said, two of the boys, two of the sergeants out of three, they were from Oakville, Sid Brown and Eddie Waller. And he said, you know, he said, we haven't got any leaves or anything. I said, why? We said, this officer, he says, he's too busy keeping us busy doing anything at all. He spends most of his time trying to go over at headquarters, trying to get jobs for us to do. I said, well, I said, no. I said, we'll stop that right away. I said, you're going to get your regular 7 days leave, and they're going to tag 48 hours in there, so you'll have 9 days. And I said, this is going to be written in stone so that you get it. And I said, if they need any other men for anything else, they've got lots of boys that are driving trucks that are just, most of the time they sit there just polishing the trucks up. After all, they couldn't move all the time, and the boys in transport, they had a lot of time on their hands. So I said, if they come and ask for men to do anything, you say, sorry, we only have so many, the rest of them are on leave. So I got all my men into shape within about 3 or 4 months, so they all had their leave and everything. I played the bugle early on in the band. This was back, probably, he might even been Halton Rifles time before I learned rifle Scottish. And they let me come in. I was only a little gaffer, but I could play a bugle. I learned it when I was about 7 years old. My dad brought me a small version of the bugle. And they went on leave, and I said to the fella, he had a bugle on one of the trains. I said, let me show you how to play it. And I'd had 1, 2, and just the vibration, it abscessed. I spent a whole leave sucking on 222. I burned all the skin out of my mouth. The pain of that to be on leave. I had my last leave in, I guess I was in, it was VJ Day. I was in Edinburgh. And when they announced VJ Day, the streets were solid. And the only trouble you had was the Americans had most of the hotels. And they were up there throwing those great big firecrackers into the crowd. I thought, God, they'll kill more than they did during the war if they keep it up. I don't know where they got a hold of all the big firecrackers, but they're throwing right out of the crowd. But the Americans had the best of it over there. The Scottish were pretty smart. As soon as the Americans came in, they saw money, and you could go up and buy beautiful Harris tweed up in Edinburgh, places like that. And when the Americans started to move up on leave, the price went up 4 times. They were smart enough to know what the market was standing. And I mean, I went up on leave, and I just wandered about from different places, in and out of the odd pub, and I did spend one beautiful leave up in Scotland. I got leave to go. Everybody, this was landing leave when I first went over here. Everybody takes a ticket, at least all of them ended. And Inverness, that was the top of the line. You could get off anywhere that you wanted. And they made a ticket out. So I was at Carlisle, which was a junction point for the railways. I'm sitting with a civilian, and you were drilled into you, do not talk to civilians. You know, the old loose lips sink ships. So we got talking about it. He said, I'm just going home on leave. He said, I'm with the Air Force. And he said, I just got into my civ. He said, he opened up his suitcase, and he had all his Air Force clothes in it. He said, where are you staying? I said, well, I hadn't planned to stay anything. Well, he says, I'm going home to Aberdeen. He said, I think my mother would be very pleased if you come stay with us. So I thought that was pretty nice. I got a place to land. So I went there and I walked in, and this woman, but it could have been my mother standing there. I looked at it. I said, the only thing that would be different, the big buffet, you know, they had cruet with whiskey on it, sitting there. My mother was was brought up as a Methodist, and she didn't like the sight of alcohol. I said, that was the only thing different. I said, went in, as soon as I got in, of course, they poured it for me too. they had a car available up there. They used to take me around. I saw the big stone pits, you know, where they quarry stone up there. God, that hole goes down forever.
And
So that's as far as I got in my leave, and it's been a lovely leave. I kept touch. It's a funny thing. I kept touch with them for a long time. I don't know what happened. I guess in business at one time, maybe I got tied up where I didn't have time to sort of take on the regular chore writing. Of course, my wife did a lot of the writing too. I lost track of, well, I don't know whether, but I did make a contact in going back to Holland this last time. I had one little slip of paper I found amongst some of the stuff I put away, and this was the Dutch LO that we picked up out in Walker Island. The one that went out the hospital with me. I said to the driver, I said, can you tell me that that number is still any good and the address? And in 15 minutes he'd been on the computer, he came back, he said, same name. The telephone number's the same, but there's 3 more numbers added to it. That's how the telephone system is grown. About a 40-year gap. I talked to her over there. She came over to see me for an hour, and since then I talked to her on the phone. We exchanged pictures and everything. That was it. What happened when he died? She wrote me in Dutch. I couldn't read it. I gave it to a Dutch fellow who was supposed to interpret it for me. He never did get it done, and he moved away. I lost the letter.
And how did you meet during the war?
I didn't meet her during the war.
But her husband?
Her husband. He was the one that went out to, he was a Dutch LO, and we went out to hospital together with chest cases, which was a nice thing to do. A chest case, it doesn't leave any holes in you. But you get one with a piece of shrapnel, that's sort of touchy. You came close enough with the Molotov bread baskets. Those were, if you have to be there and be down in a split trench when you hear those things. You know, the bread basket was a big bomb filled with those little tiny and they broke loose, and hundreds of them would just spread all over the place. And when you hear they whistled. They had a crazy whistle. It's just you thought they'd never get down and go on. The tension between the time that you could hear them coming down the big one. Oh, I actually, I still hear. I do hear from one fellow, a friend that we made in Oakville, moved up to up near south end of the lake up there. Anyhow, we got talking. I mentioned the name. I said, this fellow I think lived up Sutton. Oh, she said, my husband plays golf with them all the time. She said, I'll pick up I've just gone up to see him. She said, I'll pick up the phone and have him come over. I hadn't seen him. I almost lost him the night that we got bombed. They took him out to a field, sort of like a field station. He was on his back. He had a tag on his toe to go be moved out. And before he went in the morning, he turned him over, and he was just bleeding to death in the back. Nobody had ever turned him over. So he was what would you call the ideal picture of a soldier. Tall, big, built, white, straight. The kind of you'd like to have a whole battalion of. Oh, he was a nice fellow. Nice to see him again. Come back. The first I heard him, they had the plumbing business up there, and somebody said, oh, Perry's a millionaire. He said he had so much business up there after the war, he and his brothers. He said the money just flows in. But family business was nice to have after the war. Yeah, I started in 37. The fella came to me, actually he was the Rover Scout leader. I wasn't the Scouts and the Rovers. And he said, there's nothing to do. I worked at an A&P store for a while after high school, because I could have gone on second year university, because at the end of 5 years you could go into second year. And he said, I'm starting my business again. He said, I lost it, in depression. He said, I've hired a girl. He said, she doesn't know too much about it. He said, but I know you took a bit of extra at high school in some bookkeeping and things like that. And he said, how little could you take to come and work for me? So by that time, I was making $15 plus $3 commission on a fruit stand. So I said, I worked it down. If I get a room for $2 or $2.50, I can get by in $10 a week. It was a nice business. I ended up with it and sold it in '74. No, I don't think they'd kept me on in the Army. I was just lucky to get in because of my eyesight. In fact, I tried to get into the Air Force in '36. A buddy of mine, when we went down, he got in, went up to Borden, that's what the Air Force was then. They told me they could get lots of people who could see. Reject. No, I had never thought of staying on. A lot of them stayed on, you know, with the forces that looked after the different towns, like town, what they call them, town majors or something. And, well, they lived like kings. I knew one fellow, he ended up in a beautiful big home with a big yacht out beside on the canal. He had it made. But you could have stayed on. It was been a good life. After all, I remember I was married and I'd been away for going on 5 years. So I figured the time I saw my wife. When you say a big party, well, just from our own families. I mean, we could see we came back as drafts of coming in from every other place in the, you know, every other unit. We were only small groups, up to companies all over the place, so we really did have a concentrated group that would come back as a regiment. And the only time we were together over there was that we had one concentration which brought the equivalent of 2 battalions of learned Scots into one training area. And they got trained by the Scots Guards for, was it 4 weeks. And when at the end of that 4 weeks, they could step into any place where any guard at all. In fact, they did have the guards up in London for a while too at the CMHQ. That's the military headquarters for Canadians. No, there wasn't any great big party. We had. Oh, when you say no, I had to take some of that back. Oakville did have a big do over at the Central Command. That's what do they call it there now? That's where they brought all the retired people down from Orillia for a while, because my son was in there, and he came down there first. And they had a big do, and they had dinner and everything, and that was the time, it sounds very nice, you got the OBE to everybody that was called the Oakville bookends. So we had 2 bookends with a bronze plaque on either side with your name and everything. Unfortunately, I said that was nice, but about the same year, the baseball team, the kids have been back in town, you know, through the war. They gave them all beautiful watches. Of course, there weren't that many. No, I still have the bronzes. I took them out, but my grandson will make something for me to put them on. That was about the only thing really we had. I say until something like that happened up at Appleby College, the big do where they brought everybody in. That's about I think she has that one too.
I've
I'm sure.
got those ones.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, that's the Faisal. But the amazing things that I caught an angle where you could see the soles of their feet. I don't know whether they're walking up and down steps or what. I bet they never wore anything but new shoes every day. Those new shoes must have been taken right out of the box. That's where my mother's mother came to Cooksville. They were just off the corner, lived off the corner. That was my dad and my mother. I think they were 2. She was probably, I don't know whether he was 20, she was 18, or whether he was
sure
2.
look young.
Yeah. And you want some war pictures, though. I was just trying to get where you started.
And some of those newspapers, too, that you were showing me.
Yeah, let's see if we can get. This is my twin sister. I lost my one twin sister in the First War.
What was she doing?
She had, they had all the flu epidemic at the end of the First War.
Oh, the Spanish flu.
She's the one that had the real talent. She could sit down and hear a piece of music and sit down and play it right off. Oh, it was just
How are you doing, Mr. Kelley?
Your friend?
How are you doing?
Physically or mentally?
I just want to make
I just
sure.
wondered if that was a trick question.
No, not at all. I just want to make sure you're doing okay.
There's some photos you need shot as
No,
well.
if you mean if I'm tired or anything, no, I'm in good shape.
Okay.
I figured of the people here, I'm probably about as active as any of the men that are here.
Yes.
Most of them are a little tired.